The first time I found out a tennis court had been built on my property, I was standing on it. No warning. No letter. Just a full-on, professionally painted, green and blue monstrosity dropped right behind my backyard fence, complete with stadium-grade lights. And the kicker. It had a sign nailed to the fence that read, "Private HOA use only, residents must reserve court time at clubhouse." I'm Rowan Mercer. I bought my house 15 years ago, long before the HOA ever slithered into the neighborhood like a snake in heels. And speaking of snakes, the president of our HOA is a woman named Elaine Granger. Picture a platinum blonde bob, tennis visor permanently glued to her head, and a voice that could peel paint off a wall. Elaine is the kind of person who once fined my neighbor for having excessively joyful Halloween decorations. Back in March, I'd noticed some survey flags near the back of my acre lot. I figured it was the city doing routine checks, maybe utility mapping or something. Apparently not. Because 2 months later, I woke up to the sound of jackhammers and found a construction crew pouring concrete without so much as knocking on my door. I confronted the contractor on day one. "You sure you've got the right lot?" He glanced at his clipboard. HOA gave us the green light. Said this land was common area. "No, this land is mine," I said, pointing to the plat map framed in my hallway since the day I moved in. "You're building on my property." Contractor shrugged like it wasn't his problem. "Take it up with your HOA," so I did. That's when I heard her voice. "Oh, Rowan, don't be so dramatic," Elaine cooed at the emergency HOA meeting I forced them to hold in my driveway. The boundaries were ambiguous and, frankly, underutilized. "We're improving the neighborhood." "You mean stealing my land?" "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You weren't using it." "That's not how property rights work, Elaine." She fluffed her hair and said, "Well, if it bothers you so much, feel free to file a complaint, but the court's already up and the community loves it." "You wouldn't want to be the reason the kids don't have a place to play, would you?" I almost laughed. The only kids Elaine cared about were her Yorkies. At that moment, I realized I wasn't going to win this with a conversation. I needed leverage, and I had just the idea, so I waited. Waited until the court was finished. Waited until the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Waited until the HOA newsletter bragged about our beautiful new tennis court. Then I posted a big wooden sign at the edge of the court, right next to the HOA's sign. "Private property. Each game played, $100 usage fee payable to Rowan Mercer. Violators will be prosecuted for trespassing." Elaine stormed up to my porch later that afternoon, practically vibrating with fury. "You can't just charge people to use the court," she barked. I leaned against the doorframe. "Sure I can. You want to use my land, you pay rent. This is absurd." "Not as absurd as building a tennis court on someone's backyard without permission." Lane's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. "You're being unreasonable. The HOA board agreed this was common ground." I held up a copy of my deed. "And the county assessor still says otherwise. If you want to dispute it, go ahead. But until then, $100 a game, cash only." And just like that, the games began, not the tennis ones, the legal ones. Elaine didn't come back for 2 days, which was about as long as she could go without trying to control something. When she finally did reappear, it wasn't alone. She brought a thin, balding man in a top suit who looked like he hadn't seen sunlight since the Clinton administration. He introduced himself as Alan, the HOA's attorney. "You're going to want to take down that sign," Alan said, adjusting his glasses with the kind of confidence only someone who charged by the hour could muster. "You're creating a hostile environment for the community." I didn't even let him finish straightening his cuffs. "The community can have their environment back when they stop using my land like it's a public park." Elaine stepped forward. "We've reviewed the subdivision maps. There's a discrepancy in the boundary lines. Until it's resolved, you're creating a liability by threatening legal action." "Funny," I said, pulling a folder from behind the screen door, "because I had a surveyor out last week, certified, county registered, and he found no discrepancies. The property line runs exactly where I said it did, which means your tennis court is sitting 36 feet into my lot." Alan's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Lane tried to pivot. Then we'll simply initiate an easement request. The board will vote and we'll retroactively approve it. You'd need my consent for that, and I'm not giving it. You didn't ask before building it, and you're not bypassing me now. Alan cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. In that case, we may need to file for adverse possession. I laughed. You mean you want to try and steal my land legally? You realize that requires open, notorious, and uninterrupted use for a minimum of 10 years in this state, right? You've had a tennis court on it for 3 weeks. Elaine's jaw tightened. We're not going to let one disgruntled homeowner derail a community investment, then pay for it. You built it. You use it. You owe me rent. That's when I saw the flicker of panic in Alan's eyes. The realization that Elaine had probably steamrolled this project without running it past the legal team. He looked down at the folder in my hand and asked, "May I review your surveyor's findings?" Already sent a copy to the county and filed a formal encroachment complaint. You can get it from them, I said. I watched them walk back to their car in silence. Elaine looked like she was sucking lemons. Alan looked like he was calculating just how much paperwork was about to rain down on him. Over the next week, I started charging, not just symbolically either. I set up a small payment box by the court entrance, installed a motion-activated camera aimed directly at it, and posted laminated signs that read, "Court use requires payment. Trespassing without payment may result in legal action." Within days, the HOA board meetings became standing room only. I didn't even need to attend. My neighbors started showing up on their own, asking why they were being charged to play tennis on land they'd been told was HOA property. One resident, a retired firefighter named Miguel, called me asking if it was true I owned the land. Yep, I told him. Got the survey and deed to prove it. They built it without permission. He let out a low whistle. Elaine told everyone the land was donated, said it was part of a greenbelt easement, not even close. I've been paying taxes on it since I moved in. Miguel showed up at the next board meeting with a copy of the county parcel map printed on poster board. At that point, I could have just waited for the pressure to mount. But I had something else in mind. I filed a quiet title action. It's a legal move used to establish ownership when property boundaries are in dispute. Once filed, the HOA would have to either prove their claim or back down. And since their only argument so far had been, we assumed it was ours, they didn't have a leg to stand on. That's when the real bombshell hit. While going through the permit records for my quiet title case, I found something interesting. No permit had ever been pulled for the tennis court, no grading permit. No electrical permit for the floodlights, no construction approval from the city. Nothing. They had built an entire recreational structure on private land without any legal authorization. That's when I called the city building inspector. He showed up 2 days later with a clipboard and a frown. I walked him through the access gate and pointed to the floodlights. Those were installed without permits, correct, I said. And the court itself was poured without a grading or construction permit. He took a few notes, then looked around at the court, the benches, and the light poles. You understand this is a major code violation. I do now, I said. The next morning, a red violation notice was stapled to the court fence. Unauthorized construction subject to removal. Elaine called me that night. Her voice wasn't syrupy this time. It was clipped, controlled. Like someone trying not to scream. You reported us to the city? No, I said. I reported an unpermitted structure built on my land. The fact that the HOA built it is incidental. This is harassment. No, Elaine, this is accountability. 2 days later, I received a cease and desist letter from a new law firm clearly not Alan's. They accused me of interfering with HOA operations, damaging community morale, and attempting to extract unlawful compensation from residents. I handed it to my attorney, a friend I'd met years ago through a veterans outreach program. He read it, chuckled, and filed a countersuit for trespass, property damage, and unjust enrichment. Then came the part I didn't expect. The police showed up. not to arrest anyone but to investigate. Turns out, when the city reviewed the floodlight installation, they discovered that the wiring had been done by an unlicensed contractor. Worse, it wasn't up to code. The lights had been tied into a street lamp circuit, an illegal tap into municipal power. So now, not only had the HOA built on private land without permission, they'd also stolen electricity from the city to power it. That crossed the line from civil dispute into criminal territory. The officer who spoke to me was polite, but clearly annoyed. "Who authorized this work?" I'd guess the HOA president. "We'll be talking to her." By the end of the week, Elaine was under investigation for misuse of funds, building without permits, and utility theft. The HOA board tried to distance themselves, claiming she acted unilaterally. But emails surfaced, meeting notes. A vote had happened, but Elaine had forgotten to record it officially. She had secured a friend's contracting crew under the table to avoid permit delays. That friend, he'd already been fined twice by the city for doing unlicensed work. The court was closed indefinitely. The payment box was stolen one night, but I had it on camera. I turned the footage over to the police. They identified the thief, a board member, more charges, my attorney, and I kept pushing. The trespass case moved forward. The city issued a demolition order. The HOA, now under interim leadership, tried to negotiate. "Would you be willing to settle?" the new acting president asked. "Depends on the terms. We remove the court at our expense, restore the land to original grade, and issue a public apology. In exchange, you drop the lawsuit. Add reimbursement for my legal fees and I'll consider it." They agreed. Elaine, she resigned. The city fined her personally. Her contractor friend lost his license, and the HOA is now under audit by the state's Department of Consumer Affairs. As for me, I planted a vegetable garden where the court used to be. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers. And every time someone walks by, they ask what happened to the tennis court. I just say, it trespassed. By the time the demolition crews finished scraping the last chunk of concrete from my yard, the neighborhood didn't feel the same anymore. It felt better. Lighter. Like someone had finally opened a window in a room that had been sealed shut for years. The constant drone of authority that used to seep from every HOA notice had gone quiet, replaced by whispered questions and door-to-door apologies from board members who'd suddenly remembered they lived here too. The apology letter they mailed out was printed on cream cardstock, which I found hilarious. Nothing says, "We're sorry for criminal negligence," like a $6 ream of stationery. It was signed by the 3 remaining board members, none of whom had the gall to deliver it in person. Not after the state investigators had spent the better part of a week combing through their meeting logs and financials. They'd even seized Elaine's personal laptop after discovering she'd been managing HOA business from it under a private email alias. The real storm, though, hadn't even started. 3 days after the tennis court was removed, I got a call from a man who introduced himself as Detective Arlo Finch with the County Financial Crimes Task Force. He asked if I had a few minutes to answer some questions about the HOA's recent construction activities. "Sure," I said, putting him on speaker while I sorted mail. "I assume this is about the utility theft." "That's part of it," he replied, "but we're looking into something bigger. Do you have records of any payments made for the construction? Contractor names, invoices, anything like that?" "I don't, but the HOA should." "Why?" He paused. "Because the contractor listed on the project permit doesn't exist. The license number was fabricated. It's not even registered in the state." I stopped flipping through the envelopes. "You're saying the contractor who built the court was fake?" "Looks that way. We believe the funds may have been funneled through a shell company. It's under investigation." I didn't say anything for a moment. I just sat down and let that sink in. Elaine hadn't just built something illegally. She'd created a fake contractor, forged permits, and laundered HOA money through a ghost business. And then parked that fraud directly on my land. That explained a lot. Like why there were no inspection records, no change orders, no insurance certificates on file. It also explained why Alan, the first attorney, had backed off so fast he probably suspected what was going on and didn't want to be anywhere near it when it blew up. Detective Finch asked if I'd be willing to provide a written statement and copies of any communication I'd received during the dispute. I agreed immediately. I sent everything I had: emails, printed newsletters, the letter from the second law firm, even the footage of the payment box theft. 2 days later, the neighborhood exploded. Uniformed officers and plainclothes agents rolled into the HOA clubhouse in unmarked SUVs. They carted out boxes of documents and 2 hard drives. One of the board members, Janice from the architectural committee, was escorted out in handcuffs. She lived 2 doors down from me and had always been the one to hand-deliver violation notices with a fake sweet smile. I watched from my porch as she was loaded into the back of a cruiser. She didn't look at anyone, just stared straight ahead like she was trying to blink herself into another dimension. That afternoon, I got another call. "Rowan, it's Arlo Finch again. We're charging Miss Granger with wire fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying public records. We've also frozen the HOA's operating accounts pending a forensic audit." I stood up, stunned. "How much money are we talking about?" Preliminary estimates put it at over $160,000, and that's just the last fiscal year. It hit me like a punch. Elaine had embezzled more money than some people in our neighborhood made in a year. And she'd done it with such confidence, like she thought no one would ever question her because she wore tennis skirts and ran bake sales. The next HOA meeting was held in the community park under a rented canopy. No one wanted to go back inside the clubhouse. The temporary board president, a quiet guy named Victor who worked at the post office, stood at the front with a clipboard and tried to keep order. "We're here to rebuild trust," he said. "There will be transparency moving forward. No more closed-door meetings. All expenditures will be published monthly, and we'll be electing a new board in 60 days. People shouted questions, accusations, demands. "Where's our reserve fund? Why were we paying for fake landscaping services? Who approved the clubhouse renovations last year?" Victor held up his hands. "We're investigating all of it, every contract, every purchase. We've already hired an independent CPA to audit the books." Then he looked at me. "And we'd also like to formally thank Mr. Mercer for bringing this to light. If he hadn't stood his ground, we might never have known." Some people clapped. Others just looked stunned. No one told me off. No one glared. It was like the tide had finally turned. Later that week, I got a certified letter from the county court. Lane Granger had been formally indicted on 6 charges. The shell company she'd funneled the money through was registered in the name of her sister-in-law, who lived in another state and had never actually set foot in our subdivision. The fraudulent contractor had been paid in full by check, and those checks had been deposited into an account linked to a P.O. box rented under a fake name. It was a full-blown white-collar crime ring masquerading as a community improvement project. The city pressed charges for the unpermitted work. The state filed a civil suit for misuse of public utility access. And I filed a lien on the HOA for the legal fees they tried to dodge in our settlement. I won. The court ruled that my land had been used without consent, that the HOA had acted outside its authority, and that any funds spent on the tennis court were not eligible for reimbursement from homeowners due to the illegal nature of the project. Meaning, Elaine's cronies couldn't pass the financial fallout onto the rest of the neighborhood. The lien stuck. They paid it in full. I used the money to expand my garden and install a wrought iron fence around the back property line. Not because I thought anyone would try something again, but because I wanted a permanent line, something visible, something no one could argue with. The community changed after that. People started mowing their own lawns again instead of hiring the overpriced vendor the HOA used to mandate. Kids played in the cul-de-sacs instead of being shooed off common areas. And for the first time in years, I saw neighbors talking to each other instead of whispering about fines behind closed doors. One evening, Victor stopped by with a box of donuts and a rolled-up blueprint. "We're planning to build a new park," he said. "On actual HOA land this time. We wanted your input." I raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want my opinion after all this?" He laughed. "You're the only person around here who actually reads deeds." I looked over the blueprint. It was modest. A few benches, a small playground, no floodlights. It was perfect. Before he left, Victor hesitated at the edge of my porch. "You ever think about running for the board?" "No thanks," I said. "I prefer to keep my battles spontaneous." He grinned. "Well, just know you've got the whole neighborhood behind you now." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. It was a quiet Thursday morning when the final ripple hit. I was sitting on my back porch, coffee in hand, watching a pair of squirrels argue over a half-buried walnut near the edge of my new fence when I heard the soft crunch of gravel. A dark sedan rolled up to the curb out front, the kind that didn't belong to any of the neighbors. A woman stepped out, tall, sharp-featured, wearing a navy blue blazer. She walked up the path like she already knew the place. "Mr. Mercer?" she asked. "I'm Special Agent Lillian Park, Department of Justice." I stood up. "That's a new one." She gave a faint nod. "We're conducting a joint investigation with the state into misuse of HOA funds connected to suspected money laundering." I motioned for her to sit. "I figured something like that might be coming. You here for a statement?" "More than that," she said, pulling a notepad from her bag. "We've traced several HOA payments to offshore accounts. The shell company used for the tennis court was just one piece. Elaine Granger has ties to at least 3 other HOAs in nearby counties under different names." That caught me off guard. She was running this scam elsewhere. She'd been consulting under aliases, setting up improvement projects, funneling funds, and walking away before anyone caught on. "Your case is the first one with enough documentation to press charges that stick." I leaned back in my chair. "So this neighborhood was just her latest con." "Not just a con," Agent Park said. "We believe she was using HOA infrastructure as a front to launder real estate kickbacks. The court wasn't just a vanity project, it was a cover. She inflated costs, paid her own shell companies, and reported them as legitimate vendors." I took a long sip of coffee. "She always acted like she owned the place. Turns out she just rented it long enough to rob the walls." Agent Park looked up from her notes. "You still have the original survey and property tax records, filed and scanned. Good, you'll likely be called as a key witness. The U.S. Attorney's Office is preparing a federal indictment. She's already been denied bail." That explained the silence. I hadn't heard a peep from her or her lawyers in over a week. "Anyone else getting pulled in?" I asked. "We've already frozen assets tied to 2 other board members. One of them signed off on multiple consulting payments that didn't match any actual services. We're also reviewing HOA elections for evidence of tampered ballots." I stared at her. Ballots? Turns out she'd been rigging votes, padding attendance numbers with fake proxies, shredding opposition nominations. She kept herself and her allies in power by manipulating the system. I had no words for a moment. All those years of her winning elections unopposed, all those suspiciously unanimous votes, it was all fabricated. Park stood. "Your case blew the lid off. This isn't just about one tennis court anymore. It's part of a network. We're coordinating with multiple counties." As she left, I realized something. Elaine's arrogance had been her downfall, but the weapon had been paperwork. Deeds, permits, receipts. She'd underestimated how powerful the truth could be when it was properly documented. The trial started 2 months later. It wasn't held locally. The federal courthouse in the city hosted the proceedings. I was called to testify on the 3rd day. The courtroom was larger than I expected and colder, 2 neutral walls, fluorescent lighting, the kind of place where facts mattered more than feelings. Elaine sat on the far side, hair longer now, wearing a beige suit that didn't quite fit. Her expression was unreadable. I wasn't nervous. Just tired. Tired of the nonsense, the lies, the way she'd treated the entire neighborhood like her personal chessboard. The prosecutor asked me to explain how I discovered the encroachment, how I responded, and what unfolded afterward. I stuck to what I knew. I told them about the sign. The payments, the survey, the city violations. I showed them the photos, the footage, the correspondence. Then came the exhibits, the forged permits, the fake contractor license, the city's code violation notices. By the time I stepped down, the room felt different. Like reality had finally caught up with her. The verdict came a week later, guilty on all counts: wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit fraud. The judge sentenced her to 22 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Restitution was ordered to all HOAs affected, including ours. Property was seized. The shell companies were dissolved. The funds recovered were redistributed to affected neighborhoods. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Enough to make people believe justice still worked if you gave it the right nudge back home. Things kept moving forward. Victor and the new board finalized the plans for the park. They hosted an open build day, inviting residents to help plant trees and install benches. No contractors, no inflated invoices, just people with time and tools. I helped dig holes for the saplings, wore gloves, brought lemonade. For the first time since I'd moved in, the place felt like a neighborhood again instead of a territory. One morning, as I was pruning the tomato vines along the back fence, a kid from down the street stopped by. He looked about 12, arms full of tennis balls. "Hey, Mr. Mercer," he said. "What happened to the court?" I looked over the fence line. "It wasn't supposed to be there," he frowned. "But it was cool," I smiled. "Cool doesn't make it right. You want to play tennis, the city park's got a real one. Legal, safe, and no one's stealing electricity to run it." He nodded slowly, then ran off, bouncing a ball as he went. Later that week, Victor stopped by again. He brought a small plaque with him, simple, brushed steel mounted on a wooden base. It read, "In recognition of Rowan Mercer for defending the rights of homeowners and restoring integrity to our community." I didn't know what to say. He set it down on my porch. "We voted last night. You're officially our ethics committee chair." I didn't agree to that. "You don't have to, just keep being the guy who reads the fine print." I laughed. "Fine, but if anyone tries to build another tennis court on my beans, I'm charging double." He waved on his way out. Fair enough. Season turned. The garden grew. The HOA newsletter, now printed on plain paper and written by actual volunteers, included a new section called Know Your Rights. My name was listed as the contributor. No one questioned it. And every time someone new moved into the neighborhood, they'd hear the story eventually, not just about the court, but about how an entire scheme unraveled because one homeowner didn't roll over. Justice didn't come with sirens. It came with signatures, city stamps, and someone refusing to sign a bad deal. And that, more than anything, is what finally put the racket to